It is advertised as the future location of a megaport in the west, Tuas, where Singapore's city port activities, including Tanjong Pagar and Pasir Panjang, would shift to. The relocation will make space available for the Greater Southern Waterfront development, which will be 3 times as big as Marina Bay. But how huge is mega, really? Since Singapore is currently the top container transshipment center in the world thanks to the port operations being managed by PSA, the Tuas megaport needs to maintain its success. This is particularly true given that the marine sector accounts for 7% of the nation's GDP and is a significant economic sector. Let's take a look into one of its most amazing projects, the Tuas Mega Port Project. Weight and capacity. A trip to the site of the new port reveals the staggering extent of the developments. A construction yard at the southernmost tip of Tuas is always bustling with activity as 500 employees create large buildings that will serve as the foundation for the future megaport. Each of these watertight retaining walls, or caissons, weighs 15,000 tons, or 8,000 automobiles. Each is a 10-story HDB building's height of 28 meters. 8 caissons are produced monthly on 2 manufacturing lines at the construction yard. Each caisson is finished and then hauled out to sea where they are set on a foundation on the seafloor. More than 60% of the 222 caissons required to build the wharf for Phase 1 of the Tuas megaport have already been constructed, totaling 138 as of November 13. The megaport would centralize all of Singapore's port activities at Tuas, as first promised by then Transportation Minister Louis Tuck Yew in 2012. The first berths are anticipated to be operational in 2021, and the project will be completed in 4 phases. Most recent developments. This development is the most recent in a string of daring decisions to expand Singapore's port by constructing ahead of demand. Before Pasir Panjang was decided upon in the early 1990s, Tuas was really a viable option. 2 decades later, the port is shifting to Tuas, and Insight looks at why this is happening and how the massive project will benefit Singapore's marine sector. Container terminal boxing smart. Singapore has traditionally attempted to capitalize on fluctuations in trade demand. When the idea of building a container port was still novel, the government chose Tanjong Pagar as the location for the first one in Southeast Asia. The Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore's CEO, Mr. Andrew Tan, claims that the 1972 opening of the facility enabled us to catch the wave of containerization before everyone else in the area, MPA. When trade volume grew in the 1970s and 1980s, the then chairman of port operator PSA, Hao Yun Chung, realized there were physical restrictions on expanding city terminals and commissioned studies on where to locate new ones. One idea was to co-locate a container terminal with the airport in Changi. But because of height limits, big cranes used to move freight were thought to be impractical. Container port. As part of a $1.50 billion development plan to enhance capacity, the government stated in 1986 that it would construct a container port on the small southern island of Pulau Brani. However, while it was being constructed, a location for the following container port was being sought. Current Urban Redevelopment Authority, URA, CEO Lim Njui claims that the decision came down to Tuas and Pasir Panjang. Each had advantages and disadvantages. With regard to land usage, the URA preferred that the port be located in Tuas farther away so that the west would remain the only area where heavy vehicles could deliver containers. The heavy infrastructure should, of course, be outside and farther from the city in order to reduce traffic, according to Mr. Lim. Considerations and statements. However, Pasir Panjang was favored by the PSA because it would function as one integrated system with the city terminals. Comparing this to Tuas would result in reduced expenses. PSA CEO Tan Chong Meng stated in an interview with a Singapore think tank, the Center for Livable Cities, that the port's location in Pasir Panjang will result in cost savings of several $100 million a year owing to its improved connectivity with the city terminals. According to Mr. Lim of URA, the Pasir Panjang has several operational advantages. He said, the location in Pasir Panjang was chosen because of the region's considerable operational benefits. Future plans. The government announced plans to construct a new port at Pasir Panjang with a 36 million TEU capacity in 1992 and to increase this to 50 million TEUs in 2004. A long-term feasibility assessment of a consolidated port at Tuas with sufficient capacity to maintain Singapore's competitiveness was recommended by the Economic Strategies Committee in 2010 for the 2011 concept plan. The decision to move the port to Tuas was authorized, and the plan is now being carried out. "We looked at Tuas previously. We were not ready," said Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong in a speech in 2015. "Since then, we have built additional reclamation in Tuas, and we have looked at it again. We think we can develop a genuinely first-class port from scratch in Tuas." Design. According to MPA's Mr. Tan, Tuas is an ideal location because of its protected deep seas, closeness to both major industrial districts in western Singapore and international shipping lanes. Having all container-related activities in one place will lessen the distance and difficulty of moving containers between ports, in addition to increasing capacity to fulfill longer-term demands, he claims. Consequently, efficiency is increased. According to him, the move would save time and save expenses for port operations. Consolidation will minimize the need for interterminal haulage, which may also generate road congestion, he adds. The MPA chief executive also observes that the maritime sector has consolidated, with the big lines banding together to form significant alliances like 2M, Ocean Alliance, and the Alliance. These have also begun to employ bigger ships, such as giant container ships that can store 18,000 to 22,000 regular containers. Strategy. According to Mr. Tan, Tuas Port was designed to anchor important maritime firms in this area while also offering the extra capacity needed to support these important relationships. For instance, Tuas is made to handle gigantic boats that can accommodate up to 24,000 conventional containers. For giant boats longer than 400 meters, it offers long linear berths and approach canals that are 23 meters below sea level. In order to handle these massive ships that carry 26 rows of containers abreast, it will also feature dock cranes with a greater reach. A major port in Tuas will enable government agencies to flesh out synergies with other businesses, according to Mr. Lim, who served as the URA's chief planner before being appointed CEO. He points to the area's proximity to sectors like logistics in the future Jurong Lake Center, which will serve as the city's second central business district. On the latter, he points out that there is a chance that marine services will ultimately assemble there. At that time, Pasir Panjang provided the benefit of being closer to city ports, with a capacity estimate of 36 million TEUs. "We may not be as competitive," he adds, "if at this point in time you made a very costly decision to migrate to Tuas, and operational expenses remain to be quite high for 20-30 years as you run there." Planning for the port. Following the Economic Strategies Committee's suggestion in 2010, the MPA began collaborating with other government agencies on the Tuas megaport. The first stage, according to MPA engineer Chow Yok Ting, 27, was to create a port master plan that took location, general layout, and cargo handling capacity into consideration. According to Mr. Chow, the port's dimensions were chosen based on projections of demand for Singapore's container handling capabilities. He continues by saying that while determining capacity, planners must consider both the predicted expansion in both the world economy and marine trade. The actual layout of the terminal is planned when this is decided upon and a building schedule is established. Facilities' location and size are included in this. The planning and architecture of Tuas Port were heavily influenced by PSA, the port's operator. According to Ms. Tan Liang Wei, Assistant Vice President for Tuas Port Development at PSA Singapore, PSA offered guidance on issues including terminal design and port infrastructure, as well as on tools and technology. She continued that it assisted the MPA in determining whether or not the different plans were feasible. According to Mr. Chow, during the first physical design stage, planners reduced the number of possible layouts to a small number after taking into account, among other things, operational restrictions and environmental factors. Studies, including thorough environmental impact assessments and traffic impact studies, were conducted between 2012 and last year to finalize the design of Tuas Terminal Phase 1. Future-proof port. The Tuas megaport will serve as a showcase for the most modern systems and technology. By implementing the most recent advancements, Singapore seeks to keep one step ahead of the competition, increase productivity and efficiency at its ports, and lessen its reliance on manual labor. A smart port is already being built from the ground up by MPA and PSA. With 186 automated rail-mounted gantry cranes at phases 3 and 4 of the port in Pasir Panjang, PSA presently has the biggest automated yard crane fleet in the world. A specialized operator is no longer necessary for these autonomous cranes. Currently, one remote crane specialist is in charge of 5 automated cranes, keeping an eye on things like whether the prime mover delivering the cargo is in the proper position for offloading and whether the cranes are experiencing any problems. Jeremy. In the third building of the Pasir Panjang terminal, Mr. Jeraimi Abdul Qadir, 35, is in charge of a group of crane experts. He started working with PSA as a cargo driver in 2010, worked his way up to mentoring new drivers, and then joined the group that operates automated cranes in July of last year. He remembers that after 7 years of freight transportation, learning how to use the new system was a major problem for me. The resident of Clementi West is now eagerly anticipating his transfer to Tuas. According to Mr. Tan, PSA will have to integrate itself into the changing trade channels brought forth by programs like the Belt and Road, e-commerce, and Industry 4.0. He cautions that these adjustments may have an impact on the flow of cargo to Singapore's port. He says, "We need to make sure we actively monitor these trends, make sure we stay in touch with the evolving trade patterns, and increase our port connectivity."